Nelson Mandela is a name that has become synonymous with the struggle against institutionalized racism. Throughout his life, he embodied this fight, becoming the most renowned leader and a deeply respected figure in South Africa's anti-apartheid movement. His unwavering dedication to his beliefs led to him spending 27 years in prison, a period during which he became a symbol of resilience and hope. Upon his release, he rose to prominence as a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, celebrated both nationally and globally as a beacon of positive change. However, Mandela's journey to becoming a legend was fraught with personal sacrifices and profound losses. The compassionate and smiling statesman the world admired concealed a history marked by deep sorrow. Beyond the fact that he spent nearly 3 decades behind bars, his life was marred by a series of misfortunes that would cause even the most resilient individuals to recoil in pain. Nelson Mandela was born on July 18, 1918, in the small village of Mvezo, located on the banks of the Mbashe River in Transkei, South Africa. At birth, he was given the name Rolihlahla Mandela. In the Xhosa language, Rolihlahla translates literally to pulling the branch of a tree, but it is more commonly understood to mean troublemaker. Mandela's father, who was set to become a chief, served as an advisor to tribal chiefs for many years. However, a disagreement with the local colonial magistrate resulted in him losing his title and wealth. Mandela was still a child when his father lost his status, forcing his mother to relocate the family to Kunu, a village even smaller than Mvezo, located further north. Kunu was situated in a narrow, grassy valley without any roads, only footpaths that wound through the pastures where livestock roamed. The family lived in huts and survived on a modest diet of maize, sorghum, pumpkin, and beans, which was all they could afford. They collected water from nearby springs and streams, and all cooking was done outdoors. As a young boy, Mandela engaged in traditional games, acting out male coming-of-age rituals using toys he crafted from natural materials like tree branches and clay. At the suggestion of one of his father's friends, Nelson Mandela was baptized in the Methodist Church. This marked the beginning of a significant shift in his life as he became the first member of his family to attend school. Following the customs of the time, and likely influenced by the British educational system in South Africa, Mandela's teacher gave him the English name Nelson. When Mandela was 12 years old, his father passed away from lung disease, leading to a dramatic change in his life. He was taken in by Chief Jongintaba Dalindyebo, the acting regent of the Thembu people, who did so as a favor to Mandela's father. Years earlier, Mandela's father had recommended Jongintaba for the position of chief. This change meant that Mandela had to leave behind the carefree life he had known in Kunu, a departure that filled him with fear that he might never return to his village. He traveled by motorcar to Makekezweni, the provincial capital of Thembuland, where the chief's royal residence was located. Although he never forgot his beloved Kunu, Mandela quickly adapted to the more sophisticated surroundings of Makekezweni. In his new home, Mandela was treated with the same status and responsibilities as the regent's 2 other children, his son Justice and daughter Nomafu. He attended classes in a one-room school near the palace, where he studied subjects including English, Xhosa, history, and geography. During this time, Mandela's interest in African history began to grow, sparked by conversations with elder chiefs who visited the Great Palace on official business. According to the elders, the children of South Africa had once coexisted as brothers, but this harmony was shattered by the arrival of white men. While black people had shared their land, air, and water with the newcomers, the white settlers had claimed these resources for themselves. At the age of 16, Nelson Mandela reached a significant milestone in his life. It was time for him to undergo the traditional African circumcision ritual, a ceremony that symbolized his entry into manhood. This ritual was much more than just a surgical procedure. It was a deeply rooted cultural practice that prepared young men for adulthood. In African tradition, an uncircumcised man is not eligible to inherit his father's wealth, get married, or officiate at tribal ceremonies. Mandela, along with 25 other boys, took part in this ritual. He embraced the opportunity to participate in the customs of his people and felt ready to transition from childhood to adulthood. However, Mandela's mood changed during the proceedings when Chief Melekile, the main speaker at the ceremony, delivered a somber message. The chief expressed sorrow for the young men, explaining that they were essentially enslaved in their own country. Because their land was controlled by white men, the chief said, they would never have the chance to govern themselves. He further lamented that the potential of these young men would be wasted, as they would be forced to make a living by performing menial tasks for the white population. While Mandela did not fully grasp the chief's message at the time, he would later reflect that these words played a role in shaping his determination to fight for an independent South Africa. Under the guardianship of Regent Ntaba, Nelson Mandela was prepared for a future in high office, not as a chief, but as an advisor to one. As part of Thembu royalty, Mandela attended a Wesleyan mission school, the Clarkberry Boarding Institute, and later Wesleyan College, where he later said he achieved academic success through plain hard work. He also excelled at monitor and boxing. Initially, his classmates at the Wesleyan school teased him as a country boy, but he eventually formed friendships with several students, including Mathona, who became his first female friend. In 1939, Mandela enrolled at the University of Fort Hare, the only residential institution of higher learning for black people in South Africa at the time. Fort Hare was considered Africa's equivalent to Harvard, attracting students from all over sub-Saharan Africa. During his first year at the university, Mandela completed the required courses with a focus on Roman Dutch law, preparing himself for a career in civil service as an interpreter or clerk, roles that were considered the best a black man could achieve at the time. In his second year at Fort Hare, Mandela was elected to the Student Representative Council, SRC. At the time, students were unhappy with the quality of the food and the limited power of the SRC. In response, most students voted to boycott unless their demands were met. Standing with the student majority, Mandela resigned from his position on the SRC. The university viewed this as an act of insubordination and expelled Mandela for the remainder of the year, offering him an ultimatum. He could return to the university if he agreed to serve on the SRC. When Mandela returned home, the regent was furious, insisting that he must reverse his decision and return to school in the fall. A few weeks after Mandela's return, Regent Ntaba informed him that he had arranged a marriage for his adopted son. The regent wanted to ensure that Mandela's life was properly planned, and according to tribal custom, he had the right to make such an arrangement. Stunned by the news and feeling trapped, Mandela believed he had no choice but to comply. However, instead of accepting this decision, he ran away from home. He settled in Johannesburg, where he worked various jobs, including as a guard and clerk, while completing his bachelor's degree through correspondence courses. Mandela later enrolled at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg to study law. Nelson Mandela quickly became deeply involved in the Anti-Apartheid movement, joining the African National Congress, ANC, in 1942. Within the ANC, a small group of young Africans formed a faction known as the African National Congress Youth League. Their objective was to transform the ANC into a mass grassroots movement, drawing strength from the millions of rural peasants and working-class individuals who were voiceless under the existing regime. The group believed that the ANC's traditional methods of polite petitioning were ineffective. In 1949, the ANC officially adopted the Youth League's strategies, which included boycotts, strikes, civil disobedience, and non-cooperation. Their policy goals aimed at achieving full citizenship, land redistribution, trade union rights, and free, compulsory education for all children. For 2 decades, Mandela led peaceful and non-violent acts of defiance against the South African government and its racist policies. This included significant events such as the 1952 Defiance Campaign and the 1955 Congress of the People. He also co-founded the law firm Mandela and Tambo alongside Oliver Tambo, a brilliant scholar he had met while attending Fort Hare. The firm provided free and low-cost legal representation to Black people who were otherwise unrepresented. As detailed by the Los Angeles Times, authorities had been targeting Nelson Mandela long before they managed to imprison him. In 1956, 156 prominent members of the African National Congress, ANC, the political movement aimed at ending apartheid through non-violent means, were arrested and charged with treason, and Mandela was among those accused. The trial, which garnered significant attention, stretched on until 1961, but in the end, all of the defendants were acquitted. Ironically, by the time of the trial, Mandela's views had already begun to shift toward more radical ideas. As early as 1953, he had delivered his "No Easy Walk to Freedom" speech, where he suggested that the ANC might need to reconsider its moderate stance in the struggle against oppression. While he told the court that he adhered to nonviolence, in truth, Mandela saw this approach more as a strategic decision rather than a strict principle. After his release in 1961, Mandela went on to co-found the militant group Umkhonto we Sizwe, MK, also known as the Spear of the Nation, a militant wing of the ANC. This group was formed in response to the Sharpeville massacre of 1960, where government forces killed 69 Black protesters. Unlike the peaceful tactics of the ANC, MK was open to using guerrilla warfare and sabotage in its struggle against the apartheid regime. Although Mandela was not a military leader, he initially insisted that MK's violent actions should remain non-lethal. However, after his imprisonment, this rule gradually eroded. Meanwhile, Oliver Tambo, another ANC leader who escaped arrest, managed to secure funding for the group from the Soviet Union. This development placed Mandela on the wrong side of the Cold War, leading to his inclusion on the US government's terrorist watch list. Interestingly, Mandela remained on this list until 2008, despite being elected as the president of South Africa in 1994. The fact that he was still considered a terrorist by the US government during his presidency is a strange and awkward piece of history. Most people are aware that Nelson Mandela spent a considerable amount of time in prison, but the story of how he was captured is less well known. According to reports from the Sunday Times, as cited by The Independent, the CIA played a crucial role in Mandela's arrest. Former CIA operative Donald Rickard is said to have provided the intelligence that led to Mandela's capture, viewing him as the world's most dangerous communist outside of the Soviet Union. This was not just a baseless claim. The CIA, and Rickard in particular, were genuinely concerned that Mandela might lead a Soviet-backed revolution in South Africa, which could have forced US intervention and potentially ignited Cold War tensions. Mandela was eventually apprehended in the city of Durban, where he was disguised as a chauffeur. His arrest is widely believed to have delayed the end of apartheid by several years. Determining whether Nelson Mandela viewed his 27 years of imprisonment as his most significant personal challenge is complex, but it was undeniably the longest. According to biography, Mandela was arrested in 1962 for his involvement in organizing a workers' strike the previous year and received a 5-year prison sentence. However, the situation deteriorated in 1963 when Mandela, along with 10 other senior ANC leaders, was tried again and sentenced to life imprisonment for sabotage and other political offenses. Mandela's imprisonment extended from the beginning of his sentence in November 1962 until his release by President Frederick Willem de Klerk in February 1990. Throughout this time, Mandela, as a Black political prisoner, was treated with contempt by prison staff, further exacerbated by the South African government's attempts to undermine him. As Mandela's influence and reputation as a key figure in the anti-apartheid movement grew, government officials sought ways to silence him. A 1981 publication by a former South African intelligence agent disclosed that the government had attempted to orchestrate Mandela's escape to facilitate his accidental death. In 1985, President P.W. Botha even proposed releasing Mandela if he agreed to cease the armed struggle for equality, a condition Mandela firmly rejected. Despite Nelson Mandela's warm smile and approachable demeanor, the reality of his imprisonment was far from the serene or luxurious image one might imagine. According to Smithsonian, Mandela's years of incarceration were spent primarily on Robben Island, a prison notorious for its harsh conditions and focus on punishment rather than rehabilitation. His cell was a cramped 7 by 9 foot space, barely adequate for a single night's stay, and that was when he was permitted to be indoors. For over 13 of the 18 years Mandela spent on the island, he was subjected to grueling forced labor at the prison quarry. This work involved strenuous physical effort amid clouds of rock dust and under relentless harsh sunlight. Mandela's dissatisfaction with his conditions was evident. In his autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom, he described his cell with little affection. "I could walk the length of my cell in 3 paces. When I lay down, I could feel the wall with my feet, and my head grazed the concrete at the other side." Nelson Mandela's life was marked by both political and personal struggles, including the tragic loss of 3 of his 6 children. According to the Los Angeles Times, Mandela's first experience with such grief occurred in 1948, when his infant daughter Makaziwe, just 9 months old, died while he was powerless to prevent it. The next major tragedy in Mandela's family came in 1969, during his lengthy imprisonment. His eldest son, Madiba Thembekile, was killed in a car accident. Mandela's suffering did not end there. In 2005, Mandela faced another profound loss with the death of his son Magatho, who succumbed to AIDS after a prolonged battle with the illness. This led Mandela to become a prominent advocate for AIDS awareness and prevention. Despite these profound personal losses, Mandela's surviving children have made significant contributions to South African society. Makaziwe Mandela, named in honor of her deceased sister, has held influential roles in education and finance. Meanwhile, Zenani and Zinzi Mandela have both pursued distinguished careers as ambassadors, representing their country on the global stage. Nelson Mandela and Winnie Mandela married in 1958, a union that endured the severe strain of his 27-year imprisonment. During Mandela's incarceration, Winnie became a prominent figure in the anti-apartheid struggle. She tirelessly campaigned for his release, gave speeches, and faced frequent police harassment. Her activism sometimes included endorsing more radical tactics, including a controversial 1986 speech in which she appeared to support necklacing, a horrific method of punishment involving a tire filled with gasoline set alight around the victim's neck. This controversial endorsement and her overall visibility made her a significant figure in the movement. However, their marriage could not survive Mandela's eventual release from prison. Nelson and Winnie Mandela formally separated in 1992, 2 years after his release, and their divorce was finalized in 1996. The separation was marked by conflict, including Mandela's accusations of infidelity and Winnie's frequent criticisms of his policies. Nelson Mandela's life of hardship and imprisonment took a toll on his health. According to reports from The Telegraph, Mandela faced several significant medical issues throughout his later years. In 1985, he suffered from an enlarged prostate, which caused severe urinary blockage. The gland's problems re-emerged in 2001 as cancer, requiring radiotherapy. Mandela also experienced persistent eye issues. The alkaline stone he encountered during his forced labor on Robben Island left his tear ducts damaged, causing chronic dryness and irritation. When he became president, he underwent cataract surgery to address these problems. Due to his delicate eye condition, photographers were advised to refrain from using flash photography. Respiratory problems were another major concern for Mandela. The damp conditions of his prison cell led to his diagnosis of early-stage tuberculosis in 1988, necessitating the drainage of nearly 70 ounces of fluid from his chest. In a notable development, Mandela became the first black patient at the private clinic where he was later treated. In his final years, Mandela also began to suffer from abdominal pains. In his final years, Nelson Mandela faced a series of profound personal tragedies. Despite his retirement from public life in 2004 at the age of 85, Mandela's later years were marred by a succession of devastating losses. After stepping away from his high-profile role to reconnect with family, he was confronted with the deaths of several close relatives, including his children, daughter-in-law, first wife, and close friend. Just a year prior to his passing, Mandela faced another profound loss. His 13-year-old great-granddaughter Zenani was tragically killed in a car accident. She was on her way to an event to celebrate the 2010 Soccer World Cup in South Africa when her vehicle collided with a steel barrier. Each funeral added to the weight of his sorrow, and his renowned smile grew dimmer with each passing loss. Nelson Mandela died in 2013 at the age of 95, following a life marked by notable political achievements and considerable personal grief.